Part 56. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 566. Chapter 552, That Sir. Bimwu's face was extremely calm, without any unnecessary expression, and he forced her to retreat step by step. Suddenly, Xuekong's foot stepped on a stone, and she stumbled and fell to the ground. The pain made her gasp. However, Bimwu was still approaching. She kept shrinking and moving back. She kept groping around with her hands, and finally touched someone's trousers. Xuekong clung to it like a life-saving straw and shouted nervously, "Captain, Captain, help me. Miss Bai, she is going to kill me." She struggled to get up from the ground and wanted to hide behind Zhou Ming, but unexpectedly she pulled the wound on her arm. She grinned in pain and froze in place, unable to move. Everyone was stunned by the scene and did not react at all. Even Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran looked shocked and were out of the situation. Zhou Mingqian stood there with eyes wide open, looked down at Xuekong, and then looked up at Bimwu. Although he couldn't figure out the situation now, Xuekong was dragging him tightly, and his long nails dug into his flesh through the fabric of his pants. In an instant, the stinging pain brought back some of his sense. He took a step forward and stood in front of Xuekong. He frowned and asked Bimwu, "Miss Bai, what are you doing?" Although Bimwu is Bai Yuxiu's biological sister, he has never met her, let alone interacted with her. In contrast, Xuekong has been in the Special Administration Bureau for a long time, and he obviously knows her better. In this case, everyone will subconsciously help the party they are more familiar with, so without any hesitation, Zhou Ming naturally sided with Xuekong. Bimwu ignored him, didn't even give him a look, looked at Xuekong indifferently, and said in a cold and emotionless tone, "Let them stop." What? Xuekong was stunned and asked in a confused voice with a trembling voice. Her appearance is very innocent, and there is no flaw in her disguise. But Bimwu didn't have the patience to waste time with her. He narrowed his eyes dangerously, raised the muzzle of his gun and pointed it at her. His tone was aggravated, with a chill and murderous intent, and he said word by word, "I said, let your people, give I stop." Seeing that she was about to pull the trigger, Zhou Ming immediately shrank his pupils and shouted, "No. Xiao, stop it." Bai Yuxiu finally regained his sense from the shock and immediately rushed to stop her. He grabbed her hand and tried to take the gun from her hand, but unexpectedly, Bimwu reacted faster and escaped from his restraints. Bai Yuxiu looked down at his lost hand, his eyes flashed, and he frowned imperceptibly. When did Xiao's skills become so good? But now is not the time for him to think about this. "Xiao Yu, calm down and be good. If you have anything to do, tell me and I will help you solve it. Put the gun down quickly and don't hurt yourself." He looked at Bimwu anxiously, his eyes full of worry, and kept staring at the gun in her hand, fearing that she would accidentally discharge it and hurt him. He knew that she must have been too frightened, which caused her to have a stress reaction to the people and things around her, so she hurt unrelated people. Regardless of how she got the gun, the first priority is to stabilize her emotions before making further plans. With this thought in mind, Bai Yuxiu pondered a bit and cautiously approached Bimwu, trying to make her less excited. However, Bimwu just glanced at him and knew what he was planning to do, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The next second, the gun pointed into the sky and fired several shots, startling the birds in the forest. Bai Yuxiu's pupils trembled and he froze on the spot, not daring to move any further. At this time, the other party obviously noticed the movement here. The leader squinted his eyes and took a look. After seeing the specific situation clearly, his face suddenly changed and he shouted to the men around him, "Stop it. No more fighting. Stop." Everyone was fighting passionately and was about to have a big fight. When they suddenly heard this order, they all froze on the spot and looked at each other blankly. "Boss, what are you doing? They can't hold it anymore, as long as they continue." Before he could finish speaking, he was kicked hard by the leader. "Keep going, sir, are you blind? Look who's on the other side, are you still beating me? You've injured that man. Even if you cut off his head and use it as a ball, it's not enough." End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 567. Chapter 553. Hal Aaron. The man was kicked so hard that he couldn't tell the difference between east, west, and north for a while. His mind turned several times before he realized that the only people who can be called adults are people in the organization. His pupils suddenly dilated, and he looked to the opposite side in astonishment. He swallowed subconsciously, and a hint of shock appeared on his face. Difficult, could it be said that apart from them, what other big figures did the organization send? Bimweu's 2 shots scared everyone so much that they didn't dare to move at all. At this time, the tense situation seemed to have eased because of the 2 shots she fired. Seeing those people stopped attacking, Liu Qingran relaxed his eyebrows and his face softened a little, but he still did not dare to take it lightly and was wary of the other party's sudden attack. And focused some attention here, worried that Bai Yuxiu wouldn't be able to handle it alone. Bimweu still stood in the same position as she was shooting. The people next to her were basically more than 3 feet away from her, for fear of being affected. There was an eerie silence in the air. When the atmosphere was completely silent, Bimweu put down the gun, raised his head and squinted in the direction of the kidnapper, slightly raised the corners of his lips and chuckled, "It's not necessary now, your good men are quite self-aware. Even from such a long distance, I can still recognize it." What she didn't know was that the superpower of the person opposite him was extraordinary vision. In layman's terms, it was equivalent to clairvoyance. He could observe small things from thousands of miles away. Now, this distance is naturally nothing. Bimweu's words made the people who were already confused even more confused. They couldn't figure out the meaning of her words, and they all looked at each other at a loss. Xuekong's eyes flashed slightly, and then he looked up at her, with the same expression on his face as everyone else, and asked blankly, "Miss Bai, what are you talking about?" I don't understand." "Can't understand?" Bimweu stared at her coldly, with a dangerous cold light in his eyes, and said in a sarcastic tone, "Do you have to point me out?" "The second leader of the Kameng. Miss Hal Irene." Boom. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. As soon as the word Kameng came out, Bai Yuxiu and Liu Qingran's expressions changed drastically at the same time. They cast their gazes on her almost at the same time. Their gazes were intense and obvious, as if they were staring a hole into her. The expressions on their faces were as if they had seen a ghost. There was a buzz in Bai Yuxiu's head. As if he had been stimulated by something, he rushed forward and grabbed her wrist. Because he was too excited, he couldn't control his strength and pinched her fair wrist, leaving a red mark. He stared at her with extremely hot eyes. The suppressed emotions in his eyes were so strong that they almost condensed into substance. His voice was cold and hoarse, "How do you know?" Bimweu was caught by him, and the distance between them was extremely close. She was forced to raise her head to meet his stern gaze. His hot breath sprayed on her face, making her shudder. She raised her feet and stepped back halfway. Step. However, Bai Yuxiu didn't give her this chance at all. He changed from the gentle and gentlemanly side he used to be in front of her, and his overwhelming aura suddenly became full, making people breathless. Bimweu took a breath, and the clear reflection clearly reflected his face, as well as the undisguised anger on his face. There is no way she knows about Kameng. Bai Yuxiu couldn't believe it. Why does the sister she has loved and protected since she was a child know about the organization of Shimeng? Hal Aaron, the second master of the Shaman League. How did she know this? Did someone tell her something, or did she accidentally hear it somewhere? No, there is no way that the name Hal Eileen would be heard accidentally. So what exactly is she? Bai Yuxiu had a lot of thoughts at the moment, and the feelings in his heart were complicated and obscure. He did not think deeply about why Bai Muo said that Shui Kong was Hal Irene. What he cared about was just why she knew this. These are things that an ordinary person should not know. Bai Muo closed his eyes, a trace of sadness flashed in his eyes, and the next moment he suddenly used strength to break free from his grasp, and opened a distance of 2 or 3 meters from him, looking at him calmly without saying a word. When Bai Yuxiu met her eyes, his heart suddenly hurt. Those eyes were still the ones he was most familiar with, but at the moment their eyes were as indifferent as a stranger's, as if he had never really known her. After she showed that look, he suddenly had a bad premonition. What happened next might subvert his years of knowledge. Just as he expected, Bai Muo lowered his eyes, long black eyelashes covering up the expression under his eyes, pursed the corners of his lips into an indifferent arc, and turned to look at Shui Kong. When she finished speaking, no one noticed that Shui Kong's expression also changed slightly, but it only passed briefly. She laughed dryly, "Miss Bai, you must have recognized the wrong person." "That's right." Just when the atmosphere was deadlocked, Zhou Ming suddenly said, "Miss Bai, are you mistaken? Shui Kong is from my Special Administration Bureau, not, what you said is Irene." Everyone in the Special Administration Bureau agreed. However, Lu Qingran, who was also shocked by Bai Muo's words just now, forced himself to calm down, frowned and pondered for a moment, then turned his attention to Shui Kong, looking at her thoughtfully. Bai Muo glanced at Zhou Ming coolly, snorted softly, and said in an incomprehensible tone, "Your people." The next second, before anyone could react, she quickly reached for her waist, took out another gun that had been hidden, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Boom dash. This unexpected shot made everyone feel heartbroken. Such a fast speed, such a short distance, and such a short time. They could almost imagine how miserable Shui Kong's death would be. Those who couldn't bear to read any more had already closed their eyes, constantly wondering in their hearts whether Bai Muo was crazy. He actually killed someone in front of so many people. 1 second. 2 seconds. After 3 seconds passed, the screams that everyone imagined did not sound. They opened their eyes in surprise, only to see Bai Muo leisurely fiddling with the gun in his hand. What happened? Didn't he shoot? Is it possible that he missed? Everyone was puzzled. It's impossible. A blind person can hit it at such a close range. They slowly moved their eyes, looking around, looking for Shui Kong's figure. Finally, she was found a few meters away. Shui Kong was holding her injured arm. Perhaps the strenuous exercise caused the wound to tear again. Her face was extremely pale, and anyone could see that she was enduring great pain. She was hunched over, her whole body on alert, blood dripping down her fingers on the ground, but she didn't react at all, her eyes fixed on Bai Muo. Only then did everyone realize that it was not that Bai Muo missed the hit, but that Shui Kong had escaped the attack after disappearing in an instant and reappearing a few meters away. Ha ha ha. Bai Muo laughed twice, clapped her hands, and the corners of her lips curved up with a hint of joy. She looked at Shui Kong, who looked slightly embarrassed, and said, "Tisk, tisk, I read that right. Miss Shui can actually escape this papu, also known as a miniature artillery shell." She raised the gun in her hand and gently rubbed her index finger around the trigger. The expression on her face was very intriguing. When everyone saw clearly what was in her hand, they were stunned and stunned. That's it? Lu Qingran walked up to Bai Yuxiu, narrowed her eyes and looked at the gun, and said in a deep voice, "Papu. It is also known as a miniature supernatural cannon. It's so powerful, it's easy to kill an S-level superpower." End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 568. Chapter 554. Where is Xiao Shui? Baimui raised the corners of her mouth slightly, with a cold smile in her eyes. She looked at Shui Kong's pale face and said, Miss Shui has such strength, isn't it a bit unfair to stay in the Special Administration Bureau? She specially emphasized the word Miss Shui in a sarcastic tone. Zhou Ming, who had been arguing just now, was shocked. He stared blankly at Shui Kong, who was standing a few meters away, and then looked at the papu in Baimui's hand. His mind went blank. Xiao Shui! He shouted uncertainly, looking at the familiar face of the other party. He slowly frowned. That's not right. Zhou Ming's face changed and he looked at Shui Kong solemnly. He has some friendship with the Shui family, and he has heard Shui Kong's parents talk about her to him. Although Shui Kong is relatively strong among the young people of the Shui family, it is absolutely impossible to hide her. Exceed papu capabilities. You are not Xiaoxiu, who are you? As soon as the words fell, everyone was suddenly surprised and looked at Shui Kong in horror. She is not Shui Kong? But she clearly has the face of Shui Kong. What's going on? Just when everyone suspected that they had seen a ghost, Lu Qingran narrowed her eyes thoughtfully and said, Transformer. Zhou Ming immediately turned around and asked in disbelief, Transformer? Team leader Lu, are you sure? Lu Qingran glanced at her quietly but said nothing. On the contrary, Bai Yuxiu added, if I remember correctly, the second leader of the Kamen is a shapeshifter. He had only heard about it, but he didn't expect to see it with his own eyes today. They are both the supervision team of the association, but compared to the second team, they do not have much contact with the Cha League. It can even be said that all tasks or cases involving the Cha League are handed over by the president or the council. The second team handles it. I heard that 4 years ago, the 9 gods led the second team to destroy the lair of the Cha League in one fell swoop and killed the leader of the Cha League in public. Since the death of the leader, the surviving members of the alliance have been leaderless, with constant internal fighting, and eventually collapsed and disbanded. What I didn't expect was that a few years later, an unknown person would reorganize the Cha League again, and gradually regain the power of the Cha League in an attempt to compete with the association again. To this day, they still don't know who the new leader of the Sabo League is. The only one who has been making public appearances is Hal Eileen, the second in command of the Chasm League. Among the information collected by the association about Hal Eileen, there was a record that she was a shapeshifter, and he had only seen it accidentally. What? Zhou Ming's face instantly turned pale, and he asked Shui Kong with a trembling voice, you are a shapeshifter, what about Xiao Shui? What did you do to her? Shui Kong's parents once told him to take good care of her, but now, under his nose, Shui Kong was impersonated by a shapeshifter. So where is the real Shui Kong now? Shui Kong, oh no, it should be Hal Eileen. Seeing that his identity has been completely exposed, he simply stopped pretending, looked at them with sinister eyes, and sneered a few times, her? Oh, you are talking about that little secretary. I'm so sorry. In order to prevent her from ruining my big event, I can only ask her to go to first. There was a buzz in Zhou Ming's head, his eyes were black, and he could hardly stand still. He gritted his teeth, his voice was full of hatred, and said one word at a time, you, killed, her. What if? Keeping her will get in the way, Hal Aaron snorted, I'm not that stupid. Since you have to disguise yourself, you must eliminate all threats. I kill you. I was so anxious that I updated yesterday's code, but it didn't happen. Could it be that I coded it in a dream? End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 569. Chapter 555 Take Action. Zhou Ming's eyes were suddenly stained with bloodthirsty scarlet, and he wanted to rush forward and kill her murderer. However, Hal Aileen's reaction to his rage was extremely calm, without the slightest panic, and he even said sarcastically, "Why are you so angry? I have been in the Special Administration Bureau for so long. I rely on you all for taking care of me. Speaking of which, I want to say thank you. Zhou Ming, you." He was so angry that he could not speak. Huge sadness and anger enveloped him, and his reason was overwhelmed by the impulse that suddenly surged into his heart. He rushed towards her desperately, with the power in his hand suddenly appearing, and he wanted to kill her with one blow. Unexpectedly, Bai Mu stopped him midway. She gently put her hand on Zhou Ming's shoulder and said calmly, "Don't go there. This woman is not an easy master to deal with." Zhou Ming's expression froze slightly, and he lowered his gaze to look at the hand she put on his shoulder. It was slender, long, and as soft as boneless, as if he was so thin that he couldn't even twist a bottle cap. But he couldn't move no matter what. It was as if there were 1,000 rocks weighing heavily on his body, imprisoning him tightly. The pressure on the opponent kept coming towards him. At that moment, even his heartbeat almost became sluggish. So strong. Zhou Ming took a breath and subconsciously withdrew his powers, not daring to move any further. This leader Bai's sister is really strong. He had only felt this level of aura from team leader Bai, but Bai Mu gave him a more oppressive feeling than Bai Yuxiu. Is it possible that her strength is higher than that of team leader Bai? Zhou Ming swallowed his saliva, frightened by his own thoughts. It's impossible. How old is she? How could she have such incredible strength? Perverted. With just one movement, Bai Mu had no idea that Zhou Ming's mind had gone through thousands of twists and turns, and now he was only filled with panic and uncertainty. She stopped Zhou Ming's impulse and turned to look at Hal Aileen, with a trace of sarcasm flashing in her eyes. "Arouse us. Think they are all blind?" Behind her stood the members of the Cha League. Once they acted rashly, those superpower cannons would not have eyes. Hal Aileen laughed softly a few times and stared at Bai Mu with interest, his tone full of surprise. "It seems that I really underestimated you." She shook her head and clicked her tongue twice. "I didn't expect that the eldest lady of the Bai family is actually a person with superpowers." Bai Yuxiu suddenly clenched his fists, making a crunching sound. "But it seems like your good brother doesn't know about it?" Hal Aileen smiled and moved his gaze to Bai Yuxiu's cold face, as if watching a good show, and said with emotion, "This little imperial capital is really full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, which surprises me a lot." There were faint veins pulsing on Bai Yuxiu's forehead. "But I heard that the Bai family and his wife are ordinary people. Why do you two brothers and sisters?" Before she could finish her words, Bai Yuxiu yelled angrily, interrupting her next words, "Shut up." The next second, he made a sudden move, and his mental power split the air in an instant, and he attacked her as fast as a ghost. Then, the ground shook slightly, and countless thick vines came out of the ground, and with that mental power, they all moved towards her. She came around. Hal Aileen's eyes flashed, and her body reacted quickly, taking half a step back. The next second, the vines came close to her, and were about to pierce her abdomen. Unexpectedly, she kicked hard, exerting a slight force, and then the entangled vines jumped up and swung a blow in the air. The sound of electric current sounded, and white light flashed. By the time she landed, the vines had been crushed and extinguished. Bai Mu narrowed her eyes slightly, and seized the opportunity. Before she could stand still, she struck with a supernatural power. The moisture in the surrounding air was instantly drained, and it condensed into a huge ice prism in mid-air, flying straight towards her. Hal Aileen did not expect that Bai Mu would attack suddenly. In addition, he was injured again. The counter-attack just now was at the end of his strength and he could no longer neutralize her blow. And this blow came fiercely, with the momentum of destroying everything, and the murderous intent was clear. There is no way to avoid it, and there is no way to retreat. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 570. Chapter 556 Delaying Time. Hal Eileen gritted her teeth and sneered. Although the murderous intention was right in front of her, she slowly smiled and looked at the ice edge heading towards her calmly and indifferently. Just when the extreme cold was approaching, the next moment, a deafening explosion sounded, dust suddenly flew up, and the ice edge was shattered by the huge impact. The smoke dissipated, and Hal Irene stood there with a smile on her face, unscathed. Second Master. Everyone in the shaman quickly came to her side and surrounded her. The people in front automatically formed a row to guard against Baimwiu and the others. The leader looked at her injured arm and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" Bar. Hal Eileen waved his hand to indicate that he was fine, but still looked at the opposite side with a smile on his face. Would superpowers have such high purity of mental power? Team leader Bai's strength really surprised me. It seems that the rumors of monitoring the average talent of a team are indeed true. Bai Yuxiu twitched the corners of his lips and said, "The second boss deserves the prize." On the side, Baimwiu still maintained the same posture as before. Hearing this, his fingers curled up slightly, his eyes moved, and he glanced imperceptibly in the direction of Bai Yuxiu, with a hint of loneliness flashing across his eyes. It is indeed the first inspection team. Q Men of God. She evoked a sad smile in a corner where no one noticed. You should have guessed it earlier, right? She had already expected it from the moment he appeared with the people from the Special Administration Bureau. Now, it is just confirmed. Baimwiu sighed in his heart. Originally, she thought that her acting skills were superb and she had never shown any flaws in so many years, but she didn't expect that everyone around her was at the level of movie stars. Bai Yuxiu is the one and Lu Qingran is the one. What about third brother? Is he also a superpower? It's hard to say, she doesn't dare to think deeply about it now. When Baimwiu lowered his head and thought deeply, he didn't realize that Bai Yuxiu was actually observing her. From the moment she took action, there was no hesitation or doubt in her heart anymore. She was really a superpower. At this moment, the question he just asked her had no meaning. The facts are all in front of you, do you still need to ask? Bai Yuxiu twitched the corners of his lips in a mocking manner. Thinking back to how he had been kept in the dark for so many years without noticing anything, he felt even more like an idiot. Since his parents passed away, he has been busy taking care of the family business. Over the years, he has paid less and less attention to her, and sometimes the two of them can't even see each other a few times a year. This is all his negligence. Just as he was blaming himself repeatedly in his heart, Lu Qingran suddenly pulled his arm and whispered, "Old Bai, don't you think Xiao's superpower is a bit strange?" Bai Yuxiu frowned, "Strange? Lu Qingran said thoughtfully, "When she took action just now, I always felt a little strange. Her power seemed to be suppressed." Bai Yuxiu was shocked. What? He did not doubt Lu Qingran's words. He had a keenness in mental perception that no one else had. Lu Qingran, really, it feels like wearing a suppression bracelet. Otherwise, the blow she just struck would not have been broken so easily. Bai Yuxiu's pupils narrowed. What did you say? He immediately turned back and looked at Baimwiu, but the other person didn't seem to notice at all and was still staring at Hal Eileen. Baimwiu squinted her eyes and carefully recalled the details from just now to now. Why did she always feel that something was wrong? There are so many people on the other side, but they are still reluctant to take action. Even if they were worried about the strength of her, Bai Yuxiu, and Lu Qingran, they wouldn't be so cowed. They had heavy weapons in their hands. Even if you can't kill them, It's easy to escape after seriously injuring them. But why didn't they escape even though Hal Eileen was so injured? Are you really unable to swallow this breath, feel ashamed and refuse to leave? The second head of the Kamen League cannot be so impulsive. She definitely has other motives. Baimweo was thinking calmly. Suddenly, his eyes fell on Bai Yuxiu inadvertently. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind, and he finally realized something was wrong. Is this what you want? Hal Aaron, what? Baimweo, delay time. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 571. Chapter 557. Physical skills are so strong. After Baimweo said those 4 words, Hal Eileen was silent for a moment, then clicked his tongue, sneered, and whispered, I was discovered, this is not fun. Delaying time. Everyone in the Special Administration Bureau was also confused by her 4 words. Bai Yuxiu frowned and asked, Xiao, what do you mean? Baimweo paused and said, originally, I didn't understand why these people wanted to kidnap me in public, but after seeing you, I understood. Brother, their goal is not me, but you. Bai Yuxiu was surprised, me? Baimweo nodded, yes, kidnapping celebrities in front of the TV station in front of everyone seems audacious to you, but this is also their purpose. She turned around, her eyes calmly swept across the people in the Special Administration Bureau, and finally fell on Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran. She said calmly, although they kidnapped me, they did not extort money from my family like ordinary kidnappers. Any other demands are just to tie us up and leave us alone. This was what puzzled me the most at first. Later, after killing 2 of them, I discovered that they had another purpose. Lu Qinggran suddenly interrupted her, wait a minute, Xiao, you mean, the pile of corpses in the factory? Baimweo, I did it. Bai Yuxiu. Lu Qinggran. Others in the Special Administration Bureau. Hands of neck felt inexplicably cold. Baimweo shrugged helplessly and said, there is no other way. If I ask them, I can only use some special methods. Well, I just don't have a good grasp of the strength. Everyone. It's not just that you don't have good control over your strength. He simply didn't intend to keep him alive, no, he wanted to keep his body intact. Baimweo ignored everyone's confusion and continued, later, they brought me here, but they didn't kill me. They still trapped me here. As she said this, she suddenly sneered, they were afraid that I would become suspicious as time went on, so the second master came out in person and performed a double act with these people to hide the truth. Zhou Ming asked, when did you realize that something was wrong with Xuekong? I discovered it from the beginning. Baimweo glanced at Hal Eileen and said coldly, a secretary of the Special Administration Bureau can easily pass through the spirit barrier that only S-class and above strong men can pass through. Force barrier, unless I'm blind I can't tell. There's something wrong with her. Her words were obviously heard by Hal Eileen, who slowly raised his lips and chuckled, I see. She was still wondering what was wrong with her, but it turned out to be here. She thought Baimweo was an ordinary person who couldn't see the mental barrier and didn't know these common senses that only people with superpowers knew. However, she didn't expect that the bad thing was that she didn't investigate Baimweo's identity well in advance, and that was why she missed a move. Hal Eileen clapped her hands twice and praised, yes, Miss Bai, I take back what I said before. It's not that I underestimated you, but that I misjudged you. A person with such a strong ability can actually pretend to be harmonious. Ordinary people are no different. I admire them. Why don't you teach me a lesson? Baimweo smiled, okay, come to the prison of the Special Administration Bureau and I will teach you personally. Hal Aaron, forget it, I still prefer freedom to this. Oh, is it so? A chill flashed across Bimweo's eyes, and her tone seemed to be frozen. It's not up to you. The next second, her figure disappeared instantly and appeared less than 1 meter away from Hal Eileen. With such a fast speed, everyone in the Cha League had no time to react, and they were blocked by her ice and unable to move. Even the muzzles of the super-powered cannons were blocked by broken ice and turned into a pile of scrap metal. They could only watch as Bimweo's right hand turned into a claw and mercilessly moved towards their second master's neck. Hal Eileen leaned back slightly, cleverly dodging the blow. Bimweo's hand missed and only dangled in front of her throat, but she reacted immediately, turned around and performed a side spin kick. The leg wind is strong, implying strength. Hal Eileen also raised her legs to fight back almost instantly. Her calves collided with each other, making a heavy muffled sound. A numbing pain swept through her whole body. She involuntarily took half a step back, secretly surprised. How come? Why is her physical skills stronger than those of defensive superpowers? Is it weird? Just when she was stunned, Bimweo's ghost-like voice suddenly sounded in her ears. I'm so sorry, our boss told me. A person with superpowers who only knows superpowers and does not practice physical skills is equivalent to a waste. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fay. Chapter 572. Chapter 558. I don't mind helping you. Most superpowers only focus on the cultivation of mental power and superpowers, and neglect their own physical skills. Except for defensive superpowers, others don't pay much attention to this aspect at all. Bimweo's blow just now was beyond the scope of ordinary superpowers. She could clearly feel that her calf bones were cracked by the kick. The severe pain gradually spread throughout her body, making her take a breath. At this moment, Bimweo seized the opportunity and walked around behind her. His slender, boneless hands grabbed her life gate and pinched her throat bone. With just a little force, she could die. Do not move. Bimweo stood behind Hal Eileen, leaned close to her ear and said, if you move again, you will die. Hal Eileen struggled a few times, but Bimweo was too tight-lipped to fight back. She snorted coldly, clenched her left hand hanging by her side, and a sizzling electric current immediately surrounded her fingertips. She raised her hand and struck back. Unexpectedly, Bimweo's eyes sharpened and he caught her in an instant. Attack. The ice collides with the electricity, causing a violent reaction. The electricity melts the condensed ice and turns it into a ball of water mist, which eventually turns into water droplets and falls on the ground. The layer of frost covering Bimweo's hands receded, and he held her wrist tightly, snorting coldly, thunder element. In addition to transforming, she actually has lightning powers. Unexpectedly, he is also a dual-type psychic. The next moment, she exerted force and broke her wrist mercilessly. A clear sound of bone cracking was heard, accompanied by Hal Aaron's scream. It's a pity, you don't deserve it. As soon as Bimweo let go of her hand fell down as if she had lost consciousness. It was broken off by force. Hal Eileen gritted his teeth and endured the severe pain. You. Be honest, otherwise, I don't mind breaking both of your hands. When she fought with Hal Eileen, everyone in the Special Administration Bureau immediately reacted and rushed forward to restrain the other members of the Brawn Union who were frozen in ice. Quick, inform the Bureau to send more manpower, Zhou Ming shouted. Yes. Seeing that all his people had been captured, Hal Eileen suddenly laughed, a look of madness flashed in his eyes. So that's it, so. Her expression seemed to be that she had discovered something interesting, and she was particularly proud. Bai Yuxiu came to her and saw that she was acting crazy. He frowned and asked sternly, why are you laughing? Bimweo narrowed his eyes and exerted force on his hand. Hal Eileen coughed twice, but still looked at her with a sinister smile. So it's you. Ha 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 ha. She laughed softly a few times. I didn't expect that. I didn't recognize you after not seeing you for so many years. At the end of the sentence, her voice gradually decreased, like a mosquito. Only Baimwiu, who was closest to her, could hear those words clearly. A dark color flashed across his eyes, and his tone suddenly became sharp. Shut up. Bai Yuxiu frowned so hard that he could pinch a fly to death. Do she and Xiao know each other? He raised his eyes again and looked at Baimwiu. It could be judged from her expression that Hal Eileen seemed to have hit on something that was on her mind. Feeling the increasing strength in his throat, Hal Eileen's expression began to distort, and he breathed hard, but still had no intention of begging for mercy. His eyes gradually moved downward. The suppression bracelet is really interesting, ha, cough. After barely judging the content of her words, Bai Yuxiu was stunned and immediately looked at Baimwiu's wrist. When they fought, the bracelet appeared automatically due to the huge mental power, but it was blocked. The cuffs of the shirt are covered, so you can't even notice it unless you look carefully. Baimwiu frowned, put down his cuffs, and covered his bracelet. Xiao, you. Bai Yuxiu looked at her in surprise. What Lu Qingran said just now is true. She does have something that suppresses her mental power. But why is it a suppression bracelet? This is obviously, only those with superpowers who make mistakes and break the law are forced to wear it, just like handcuffs. Xiao, she. Thinking of this, Bai Yuxiu couldn't help but frowned. Are you curious? Hal Eileen looked at Bai Yuxiu's thoughtful expression, glanced at Baimwiu behind her, and said, I have to ask your good sister. Ask her. She has been doing things for so many years, only to be ugh. Before the next words were spoken, they suddenly disappeared in the middle. Baimwiu's eyes were extremely cold and he had lost his patience. If you are really in such a hurry to die, I can help you. End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy and Fei. Chapter 573. Chapter 559. What happened? Seeing that she was really planning to take action, Hal Eileen wisely shut her mouth. Baimwiu narrowed her eyes and relaxed her strength a little so that she would not be suffocated to death. Tell me, what is your purpose? She glanced at the people of the Kameng who had no resistance at all, and hummed softly, your men can't save you a second time, so those who know how to deal with it should speak up quickly. Hal Eileen didn't take it seriously. Do you think I'm afraid? As the second head of the Kameng League, how could he be afraid of her threat if he had never seen anything before? She smiled proudly and said, for the sake of our old acquaintance, I would like to advise you that you'd better not go against us again, otherwise, it's hard to say what will happen in the end. The we she said naturally refers to the Shemeng. Lu Qingran and Bai Yuxiu looked at each other and felt that the sentence was very informative. It seems that the Kameng is planning some big move, and this kidnapping is probably one of their steps. Baimwiu sneered, I will return this sentence as it is. They have already destroyed their nest once, are they still afraid of the second time? That's it, it's up to you whether you believe it or not. Hal Eileen stopped talking and looked like he was at your mercy. The more she kept refusing to tell anyone, the more Baimwiu became convinced that there was something wrong with her, and the purpose of the alliance must be closely related to the Special Administration Bureau. Maybe. Baimwiu glanced at Bai Yuxiu secretly. Perhaps even a team is in their plan. Originally, she was surprised that in the eyes of everyone, she was just an actor, with nothing special and had never offended anyone. How could someone be so blatant as to dare to abduct her in front of the TV station? Aren't they afraid of the consequences of doing so? Now she thought clearly, the reason why they kidnapped her was not because of herself, but because of Bai Yuxiu. When he appeared here with everyone from the Special Administration Bureau, the intermittent thoughts in her mind were finally connected, and all the doubts were answered. The Kameng trapped her here in order to lure Bai Yuxiu and others to chase them and deal with them so that they could complete their plan. As for the content of this plan and its relationship with the Special Administration Bureau, she still needs to be interrogated further. A dark color flashed under Bai Mui's eyes. But now, I am afraid that the people from the Special Administration Bureau will not agree to her interrogation. After all, she has not been registered in their files and is an unidentified person. In addition, it is estimated that she used superpowers to kill those people in violation of regulations. Been detained for some time. Bai Mui's expectation was good. After the reinforcements sent by the Special Administration Bureau arrived and took over everything present, Zhou Ming, carrying a pair of special handcuffs, stepped forward, cleared his throat, and said with a dry smile, "Miss Bai, leave it to us." He pointed at Hal Irene, who was being held by her throat, his expression unnatural for a moment. In the end, if it weren't for Bai Mu, all of them would have been killed by Hal Irene and his men long ago. How could they have waited for reinforcements to arrive? Now they were going to take Hal Irene away from her for nothing. If it were him, he would not agree at all. What he didn't expect was that Bai Mu agreed readily and directly pushed the person to him. Here. Zhou Ming was startled, and hurriedly cuffed the person to ensure that she could not fly even with her wings. Only then did she finally breathe a sigh of relief, almost breaking out in a cold sweat. Can't she just let her know? This is Hal Irene, the second in command of the Alliance and a top dangerous person. What if she accidentally escapes? Just when Zhou Ming was still feeling frightened, a person suddenly ran over in a hurry and shouted, "No!" Something happened. His heart, which had been falling, suddenly skipped a beat. What happened again? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 574. Chapter 560. The man was running out of breath, thinking that the matter was very urgent, but in such a situation, he still glanced around cautiously, as if he was worried about something, and finally turned his attention to Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran, paused, and walked towards them. In front of him, he whispered into his ear, "Mr. Li and Mr. Qi were kidnapped." The two people's pupils shrank at the same time. What? Since the man's voice was very low and Zhou Ming was far away, he couldn't hear clearly at all. He was startled by their reactions and subconsciously asked, "What happened?" However, Bai Yuxiu was not in the mood to pay attention to him, and confirmed to the man seriously, "Are you sure?" The man nodded. Lu Qinggran shouted in a deep voice, "Lao Bai." Before he could finish speaking, Bai Yuxiu immediately understood, "I know." He turned around, a flash of urgency flashed between his eyebrows, and ordered Zhou Ming, "I'll leave this to you. Take everyone at the scene back for strict interrogation, and find out their purpose." "Yes," Zhou Ming replied subconsciously. When he came to his senses and wanted to ask more questions with a confused look on his face, he found that Bai Yuxiu turned around and left in a hurry. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Bai Mu say from behind him, "Brother." Bai Yu paused for a moment, stopped, and looked back at her, his eyes flashing with unexplainable complex emotions. Then he sighed softly and helplessly said to Zhou Ming, "Bring her back to the station, to verify her identity." After the last four words came out, Bai Mu's eyes flashed, and he lowered his gaze. There was a mixture of light and dark in his eyes, but he said nothing. "Zhou Ming, yes." He secretly glanced at Bai Mu's expression and found that there was nothing unusual about it, and he suddenly became more confused. He really couldn't understand what the two brothers and sisters were thinking. Logically speaking, if you find that the other person is lying to you, shouldn't you feel more or less angry? How come one or two people reacted so calmly? It's not normal. Even though he was complaining in his heart, he coughed twice and said, "Miss Bai, I'm sorry, this is also the rule." Before he could finish his explanation, Bai Muo suddenly said, "I know." She raised her head, and the emotion in her eyes was fleeting. She raised the corners of her mouth slightly, and her attitude was particularly gentle. "I'm causing trouble for you." Zhou Ming was flattered. "No trouble, no trouble." Even though they still don't know who she is, the fact that she can subdue Hal Eileen with a few tricks is enough to show that this is an ancestor they cannot afford to offend. Bai Muo smiled, then turned his gaze to Hal Irene, who was being taken into the car not far away, and slowly narrowed his eyes. She can read lips. Even though the man just lowered his voice, she read out everything she needed to know. Mr. Li and Mr. Chi were both kidnapped at the Yun family's birthday banquet. At present, the outside world is in chaos. Bai Yuxiu and Lu Qinggran were also hurriedly called away. Thinking about it, this is the purpose of the alliance. Bai Muo laughed softly. I see. They went through so much effort just to attract the attention of the Special Administration Bureau so that they could attack the real target. But what they never expected was that their second-in-command would appear in person in order to ensure the situation, and they never expected that everyone would fall into the hands of her carefully selected hostage in the end. It's true that the agency's calculations were too clever, and in the end it was all in vain. It's okay, Hal Eileen was brought back to the Special Administration Bureau, and I took this opportunity to follow her and interrogate her carefully to see what can be obtained from her. Bai Muo smiled and followed the others from the Special Administration Bureau into the car. On the way back to the Special Administration Bureau, she was very quiet and had no unnecessary expression, as if this was a normal thing. However, the more she acted like this, the more unsure Zhou Ming felt. This is so wrong. He could see that team leader Bai didn't know that Bai Muo was a superpower, and Bai Muo obviously didn't know team leader Bai's identity either. The two siblings had been hiding it from each other for so many years. He could hardly imagine that the two brothers and sisters had grown up together, but they were acting with each other every day. If it were him, he would definitely go crazy on the spot. But Bai Muo's reaction was a little too cold. They say the sea is always calm before a storm. Should she be dismantling the Special Administration Bureau later? End of this chapter. She always loves to sleep. Author, Guy Enfe. Chapter 575. Chapter 561. Going to Yun's house. At this time, in a club in Daijing, Li Ju was listening to reports from his subordinates. We followed team leader He these past few days and almost turned the entire black market over, but we still couldn't catch them. One of the team members lowered his head and spoke intermittently, looking up from time to time to observe Li Ju's expression. He was nervous, for fear of being punished for saying something wrong. Li Ju lowered his eyes with a forlorn expression, as if he couldn't get enough energy. He didn't give him a look at all. Ji Yunchu on the side saw this, sighed, and asked, "Are you okay?" For some reason, Li Ju's stable mental power suddenly fluctuated. If she hadn't discovered it in time and temporarily suppressed her surge of mental power with supernatural powers, everyone within a 10-mile radius of her would have suffered. In order to avoid hurting ordinary people, she temporarily decided to take Li Ju to this club far away from the city center to stay for a few days. Firstly, it was convenient for her to treat her, and secondly, it was also to prevent any accidents from happening. Innocent people were accidentally injured. However, since arriving here, Li Ju's mood has not been very high. His whole state seems to have returned to what it was when he was in the association. His whole body exudes a violent aura, like a beast that has been sleeping for a long time and is about to wake up. Li Ju pressed his temple irritably, feeling unhappy. "It's okay." Ji Yunchu stretched out his hand, put his fingertips on her wrist, frowned and said, "I told you to calm down, otherwise you will feel even more uncomfortable." "Li Ju, I think so too. but she was very irritable and couldn't explain why. Ji Yunchu was silent for a long time, and then suggested, "Otherwise, I will take the third master over." Looking at her like this, it was probably because Chi Jinkai was not around and she was lonely. "Li Ju." She was silent for a moment and turned her gaze to the large group of people in front of her. Everyone had a tacit understanding of looking at the sky, the ground, and their toes, but they didn't dare to look at her side. "I didn't expect that Ju Shen, who is usually such a ruthless and indifferent person, would still miss her boyfriend like a little girl. They won't be silenced just because they heard something they shouldn't have heard." Li Ju frowned, turning a blind eye to their behavior of not having 300 taels of silver here, and asked in a deep voice, "Has the black market been checked?" The person just now replied immediately, "I checked, there is no problem. There are not many people going in and out there usually, so I didn't find anything abnormal." When Ji Yunchu heard this, his expression was a bit incredulous. "This is strange. In such a big place, how could they disappear out of thin air?" Li Ju sneered, "Who can say for sure, in a place like a black market street, as long as someone puts some thought into setting it up, others won't be able to spot it easily." Just as Li Ju was about to speak and ask them to continue their investigation, the door of the box was pushed open suddenly. Ning Feng panted and held the door while he was out of breath. "Boss, boss." Seeing that he looked particularly anxious, Li Ju and Ji Yunchu looked at each other and already guessed the purpose of his coming here. They said, "Don't be anxious yet. We know about Lao Liu's matter. She should be able to handle it alone." They had already received the news as soon as Baimwiu was arrested, but they did not take any action. To Baimwiu, those kidnappers were no different than being sent to death. As a member of the second team, if she couldn't deal with even a few kidnappers, she would not be qualified to stay in the second team. Unexpectedly, Ning Feng shook his head violently. "I'm not talking about her. No one knows Baimwiu's strength better than him, so he is not worried at all. He came here because of other urgent matters. The fourth brother and third brother's wristband signals have disappeared." Li Ju and Ji Yunchu stood up at the same time. "What did you say?" Li Ju frowned fiercely. "What's going on? Tell me quickly." In fact, each of them has a superpower bracelet, and it also has a positioning device embedded in it, so that they can know their location at any time. Moreover, the positioning device has its own signal transmitter, so it can receive feedback even in places where there is no signal. And now the signal is interrupted. It can only mean one thing: the signal has been cut off artificially. Ning Feng, just now, their two signals disappeared at the same time, and they can no longer be traced. He looked at Li Ju anxiously. "Boss, has something happened to them?" Ji Yunchu frowned. "If I remember correctly, the two of them should be accompanying the two old men to celebrate their birthdays today." At this point, her pupils shrank suddenly. "Not good. Two old men." Ji Yunchu looked at Li Ju like a reflex. The latter's face suddenly turned cold, and the aura around him instantly became extremely overwhelming. She picked up the car keys beside her and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, go to Yun's house." End of this chapter.